Are you thinking of leaving corporate, but too afraid to make the move? Have you already escaped corporate, but are finding it hard to run your dream business? Are you wasting valuable time by attempting to figure challenges out on your own? We have created a podcast for corporate escapees running their own business. This is the Corporate Escapees Podcast by Build, Live, Give. We bring you firsthand experiences of guests going through many of the struggles you face each and every day as a corporate escapee. We get real with no corporate BS. And now, over to your host, Paul Higgins.
Hello and welcome to Corporate Escapees, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of people who are successfully running their own businesses, hearing their war stories and motivations for making the jump from their corporate gig. I'm your host, Paul Higgins, and our guest today is someone who left corporate when his wife and he were having their first baby. He also talks about how he started his coaching business and how he learnt the art of selling. He gives you some brilliant tips on how to sell. He also shares his experience on what to look for when you are picking a coach and also how to scale your business. So what I'll do is now hand you over to CJ McClanahan. Welcome, CJ McClanahan, to the Corporate Escapees podcast, brought to you by Build, Live, Give. So CJ, we're going to get to know a lot about you today, but why don't we start with something that your family or friends would know about you that our listeners wouldn't?
My family and friends would know a lot about me that your listeners wouldn't, and I would beg them not to tell everything to you about me that your listeners wouldn't. But most of all, I think my family and friends would tell you that I have been on this wacky career journey of figuring out what it is I want to do when I grow up and making it up as I go along. And I think my friends and family would tell you that I'm very lighthearted and I don't take anything too seriously. At least I don't think I take anything too seriously. And finally, my family and friends, in fact, I'd say this, Paul, especially my family would be they would be the people on this planet who are least impressed with anything I've done. And in fact, they might even be amazed from time to time that people pay me money to teach them things. That is what they would tell you.
So I take it they're not normal listeners to your podcast?
Not even a bit. Actually, every now and then they listen to it and they go, do people really listen to this? And I'm like, yes, they do. I promise.
Yeah, look, my parents still got no idea really what I do after I left corporate. They can't explain it at all. And
they're amazed you get paid.
Correct. And, like he just sits in his tracksuit pants at home all the time. He's just having a midlife crisis and he'll eventually get over it. But, you started with Arthur Andersen, which I know is a very interesting company in itself, but just take us a little bit back to your corporate escapee story.
Yeah, so I started at Arthur Andersen and I left many, many, many years ago. And I had a very unique opportunity to run a manufacturing company because I was coaching a guy's daughters in basketball. And he thought because I worked at Arthur Andersen and I was a good basketball coach of fifth grade girls, I knew how to run a company, which of course is not even remotely true. But he gave me this really unique opportunity to run a soap and shampoo company with a couple other guys called Gilchrist and Soames. I left there to run a sales team at a software company, something else I had never done, sell software, but I probably ran a 20-person sales team in the automotive industry. And in 2003, after many, many years of corporate America, I decided to go out on my own and try something new.
Great. And what was that? What was your first step out?
So I wanted to, in 2003, my wife was pregnant with our first child, Ian. And we were sitting on the back porch and I looked at her and I said, I'm going to start my own company. And she scratched her head and said, have you thought this through? I mean, we're getting ready to have a kid. Are you sure? And I'm like, I think so. I just don't want to work for other people anymore. Not necessarily the best way to do this. And she looked at me and she's like, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. Hopefully something that makes money. And I went out and I might be a little bit different than a lot of people who did this, but I started just asking people, how do you buy a company? And I asked one person and I asked two people and I asked three people. And the next thing you know, I get introduced to someone called a franchise broker. And a franchise broker is what you think it is. It's someone who helps put prospective people looking for companies in touch with franchises. And I end up buying this franchise from a little town called Brisbane, Australia, called Action International at the time. And that was 15 years ago. So I bought a business coaching franchise and started making cold calls out of my business, out of my basement to try to get people to hire me to be their business coach.
Wow. And at the time, I know your wife, just about to have your first child. What were some of the key fears that you and your wife had at the time?
My wife, so again, and we were speaking off air, Paul, but my wife to this day is a little bit uncertain of exactly what it is that I do. And even a little bit more amazed that people continuously allow me to grow this business. But what was interesting is when I started the business, I'm a little bit risk adverse in my nature, which is really unusual for an entrepreneur. And I kept asking her to give me a way out of the business. And finally, one day she said, just do it. We'll figure it out. And so as I look back on my business, my wife had more confidence and courage in me than I did in myself. And thank goodness that she did, because had she said, I don't think you've got what it takes, I probably wouldn't have done it today. And I might be running a sales team today instead of being an entrepreneur, which I absolutely love.
Great. And I know that action coaches seem to have a bit of a roller coaster ride over the years. I actually had an action coach myself at one point, but just tell us a little bit about that organization, what you learned from that, and
Sure.
where it's at now.
So yeah, great question. So I action coach. So fundamentally, every franchise exists to teach someone a system for coaching or for doing whatever it is, whether it's McDonald's or whatever else it is, and then helping you to generate leads. Action coach was great for me at the time. And again, this is 2003, because it made me burn the bridges. That story of I'm going to go out and I've got to make it work. So we took all of our savings and I signed this coaching or this franchise agreement with Action Coach that absolutely fundamentally said I had to be a part of the franchise for 5 years. There was no quitting or not making it. And what Action did for me is it pushed me way, way, way outside of my comfort zone. And it gave me a little bit of structure to what it is that I do. Action and I ended up parting ways 3 years into the agreement for a variety of different reasons. It was not their fault. It was not my fault. I think why Action has gone up and down over the years is probably because, and this is my opinion, but I will tell you, I think it's very hard to teach someone how to coach, because coaching is a very personal relationship you have with an entrepreneur, with a business owner, or with an executive. And everybody does it very differently. Number one. Number two, I think in the beginning, Action really recruited people who were CFOs, CEOs, CHOs, whatever it is. They were recruiting kind of the top layer of the executive corporate ranks. And these people couldn't sell. And when you start your own business, and you must know this, Paul, you got to be able to sell, and you got to be able to, take some kicks to the groin and get really used to selling. And if you're not able to do that, no matter how smart you are or how strong your corporate background is, you're not going to be successful. And so I think Action has ridden that wave up and down over the years.
Great. And what were some of the key things that you learned about selling as an action coach?
That's a great question. I learned that unless I could deliver what it is that I was selling, unless I felt really good about the services that I was going to provide, I was unable to sell to people. When I'm going to a business owner, an entrepreneur, and money's tight for them and they're trying to grow their business, if I don't feel 100% certain that I'm going to be able to deliver value, I struggle to ask them for money. One thing. So I had to really get good at my craft. The second thing it taught me was failure is a big part of selling. And if you're not going to be okay with failing, you're going to struggle to sell. And the third thing I learned about from Action coaching is that the best way to get good at sales is to practice. And if this were another podcast and we were going to spend hours on the show together today, Paul, I would tell you stories of me screwing up in front of clients that would make you faint. The stupid things I did in front of prospects in the beginning were unbelievable, but they were so valuable because that's the only way you really learn.
Great. So, Jane, is there any difference in what you just explained there on you selling Action Coach to what you were helping the business owners? So if I'm a business owner listening to this show now, what are the key tips you'd give them on selling?
It's identical.
Yep.
You know that. I mean, what I tell business owners is, if you're going to go out on your own and you think that there's some magical small business that you're going to start and not be able to sell, I think it's highly unlikely. You got to get comfortable with rejection. Yeah, I'm not saying you got to love rejection. I still hate it. But you got to wake up and say, I'm going to be okay being rejected. And I know that I'm going to have to go out and ask people to buy my product or service. I don't care if you start a restaurant. It doesn't matter. You got to be okay asking and being rejected. It's part of the game, no matter what it is you do from a small business standpoint.
Great. And what sort of help did you get through that transition out of corporate into your own business?
That is a great question. I think I got some good advice. There's no doubt about that. But most importantly, I had this great piece of advice called fear. And fear is when you are unable to pay the bills unless you sell something. And fear is an unbelievable motivator. But what I also had with action is, because I started my coaching career with some other coaches around the country. In fact, a guy in Minnesota became a really, really good friend of mine. Actually, Wisconsin. I said Minnesota, he'd kill me. In Wisconsin, he became a really good friend of mine, and we could lean on one another. But mostly from a coaching standpoint, it was kind of trial by fire. Get out there, ask for business, get turned down, figure out a different way to do it next time.
Great. Well, the next section is the build section. That sort of takes us into today. So when someone says, hey, CJ, what do you do? How do you answer that?
I inspire executives and small business owners to make the right decisions at the right time so that they can maximize the growth of their business and improve their personal lives.
Great. And how do you, is there a difference in the way that you do that for executives versus small business, or is it a similar methodology that you apply across both?
I would say it's fairly similar. However, as you know, working for yourself and working for someone else are two very different things. And so the small business owner, I will approach it slightly differently because it's their money in the game. And they have a greater sense of risk because it is their business. So while the fundamental principles are the same, the way that I will approach them is going to be slightly different.
Great. And your ideal clients. So yes, executives and small business, but just be a little more specific around who your ideal client is, certainly from a small business perspective. Who's your ideal client when it comes to small businesses?
Yeah, you bet. So I could spend a day telling you who I don't want to work with because they were my clients forever. But today, I'm fairly clear that my ideal client is a small business owner who is passionate about what it is that they're selling. They have a product that has a unique selling proposition. So I'm not great with commoditized goods and services. You've got to have something that makes you a little bit unique and has a huge growth trajectory. So they want to really grow the business extremely quickly. They've already proven it. So they've probably got at least a couple of years behind their belt. And they've got this value proposition that allows them to generate a little bit more of a gross margin so that we can really take some risks and grow the business. And finally, I need people that are very coachable, very self-aware about what it is they need to do to change, and very self-aware and look themselves in the mirror and say, wow, there's a bunch of different things I got to do differently in order to grow my business.
Yeah. And how do you determine whether someone's coachable or not?
That's a great question. I want to tell you that I have a sixth sense about it now, which is not going to help your listeners at all, not even a little bit. I'm probably going to ask a handful of very fundamental questions. And question number one will be something along the lines of, what is the one skill you need to develop in order to grow your business? That one skill. And if someone rattles off 3 or 4 skills, I know they're self-aware and I know they want to grow. But, Paul, I'll ask that question and some people will just sit there in silence. Like, I'm so perfect. I can't imagine there's anything I could learn to grow my business. Mm-hmm. Number 2 is walk me through some of the mistakes you've made in the past year, 2 years, 3 years that have hurt your ability to grow your business. The self-aware, coachable person, those are on the tip of their tongue because they're so self-aware and they're so ready to talk about where they need to get better. They're ready to just rattle those off. The not self-aware person is going to struggle to answer that question.
Great. And is there any more?
That's pretty much the basics. And this is terrible, but I've been doing this for 15 years. I've sat in front of so many people, I can almost smell it on them now.
Mm.
And I would say this to your listeners: if you're not ready to admit mistakes, starting your own business is really not the right path for you, because one thing I can guarantee you, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And you might run into people different, Paul, but I have yet to meet a business owner and an entrepreneur who says, I had success, then I had more success, then I had more success. It's just not the way it works.
Yeah, and for someone, so if you're listening out there and you're picking the wrong clients and you're not trusting your gut, if you're doing that, CJ, what would you say to that person listening right now that's constantly making that mistake, that they're not trusting their gut and they're picking the wrong clients?
Well, typically picking the wrong clients comes from, number one, you don't understand what the right client looks like. So I would first of all say, sit down with a piece of paper at a desk and write down the ideal characteristics of the perfect client. And number two, I would say you've got to begin to believe that you've earned the right to work with that perfect client. You've got to begin to feel really comfortable that you've earned this ability to work with this perfect client. It's not some far out person out there who would never want to work with you. You've earned this right. And the third thing is, as you think about your ideal and perfect client, you've got to be real comfortable in the product or service that you're providing, because if you're not comfortable in that product or service, you're going to struggle to find that ideal perfect client.
And your business model, just take us a little bit through the business model that you have to inspire small business people.
So my model is based on a retainer. I've done that for 15 years, primarily because I don't want my clients to think of me as an hourly resource, or they don't like to reach out and talk to me, and they don't want to bother me because they think I'm going to be charging them, $100 for every 6 minutes or whatever it ends up being. So I basically tell people, I am going to be your coach, your resource, and you have pretty much access to me whenever you need it. We're going to probably meet once a month, and then you have access to me outside of our meetings. In fact, I'm not certain I recommend this, but I don't have people sign a long-term agreement. Mine are always month to month. And my position is, if I'm not adding value, just get rid of me. I argue that anyone in my business should have a similar value proposition, because the last thing I want to do is trick someone into signing some long-term agreement and they get a few months into it and they don't like it. So long as I'm providing value to the client that's a good fit for me, I just keep clients going on and on and on until a natural time when they leave, and then I add a new client.
Great. And you spoke before about, getting a point of difference. What is your unique value proposition? What's your point of difference?
6 feet, 5 inches, bald is really what makes me different. I'm making that up, Paul. That's not it at all. So I would say what makes me different, it is different. What I said early on is coaching is a very personal, it's a very personal relationship. So I would say that what I've always led with is that I have a corporate background and I've run a business, but I also understand the softer, the more subjective portions of coaching and dealing with people. I am a really good fit for the person who's really passionate about what it is they want to do and wants to hit the ground and run fast. I'm not a good fit for the person who wants to move slowly and wants to plod along. So my value proposition is that I've got this big corporate background, but I also know how to coach. But I will tell you this, and I tell this to every prospect: some people like me, some people don't. I'm not everybody's cup of tea.
Great. And tips for people listening on how to pick the right coach for them?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say this. So every other person you meet in the world today is a coach. In fact, that's a recent study. It's not, I made that up, but a lot of people are coaching. So my recommendation first, Paul, is to interview at least 3 coaches. And when you interview these coaches, you want to ask them, you want to know 3 things about them. Number one, what's their background? So you want to understand, does someone have the intellectual background and the experience to provide me with the type of value that I need for my unique business? Number 2, do I trust them and do I like them? Because if you don't like someone and you don't trust someone, you're going to really struggle to work with them, regardless of how great their background is. Coaching is really, really personal. And if you don't connect with someone emotionally, you're not going to be able to work with them. And finally, and possibly most importantly, do I like their approach? Every coach has a slightly different way they coach, and every coach has a slightly different program that they follow. And you want to make certain that the program that you're following with that individual is a good fit for you. Because if it isn't a good fit for you, you're not going to be successful in whatever it is you decide to do with a coach.
Yeah, look, great advice. And we've got lots of coaches that listen to this podcast. What are some of the things that you've done to improve the profitability of your coaching business?
Charge more money. Sometimes I feel like I give the worst advice, but it truly is the best advice, Paul. Once you really find that ideal client for you, where you provide a ton of value, your monthly retainer can double. It really can. That's number one thing I've done to improve my gross margin. Number two thing I did, and this is really for that younger coach out there who is maybe driving around to people's sites. I have an office and everyone comes to me. And by everyone coming to me, it means I'm never in the car. I'm never driving around, or I might be coaching folks over the telephone. And the number three thing that I've done to increase some of my profitability is that I have streamlined my processes so that the value I deliver to each client, and again, bear in mind, I've been doing this 15 years, but the value I've delivered to each client is it's a lot easier for me to grab into my bag of tricks and to pull out a system or a process and allow that system or process to work across clients. So systematize the way it is that you do things so that you're not just running it based on your gut, but you are running it more effectively based upon a system that you've put in place over the years.
Yeah, and can you give me an example of a system?
You bet. So let's take one I did today. I've got a great system that helps people hire new employees. It is a system that I probably developed 7 or 8 years ago, and it walks you all the way from how do I generate a new lead or a new candidate to interviewing them over the telephone, interviewing them face-to-face, what personality profiles to give them, how to decide on the final candidate. It's just a system I built many years ago. I've got another system for grading your sales team, ironically. So how do you know if your sales team is really doing what it is they need to do? Most entrepreneurs or sales managers, they lean on their gut. And I like to make it a little bit more based on data. So I've got a system for managing people. I've got a system for understanding your financials, all kinds of systems like that.
Great. And where do those systems sort of sit? Where's your IP sit in your business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So ultimately, it all exists underneath my within my business. It's all my own IP. Having said all of that, if you came to me, let's back up. What I think is interesting about IP is, especially from a coaching standpoint, I've got a lot of IP, but I'm not certain any of it you couldn't Google on your own. What you've got to really get good at as a coach is you've got to get good at selecting what type of a system or what type of whatever IP you're going to do, when to deliver that to a client. That's the real value that we provide as coaches. So I've got all this IP that exists within my four walls here, but if I'm not effectively distributing that to clients at the right time, it's not valuable at all. And the really good coaches out there, they know when to pull the tool out of their tool belt and when to deliver it to the client.
And what's the number one source of new business for you?
It is all referrals right now. So my business model is slightly flawed, as you can imagine. I trade time for dollars, and I did have coaches working for me at one point. And there's a reason why I don't do that anymore. But I now get almost all my clients come from referrals, and I interview people. And when I have a new opening, I'll go out to my referral base and say, I've got a new opening if anyone would like to be a new client of mine.
And the reason why the coaches working for you didn't work?
So coaching, unlike if you're an accountant, you have to pass a CPA, or if you're an attorney, you have to pass a bar exam. Coaching is kind of a made-up industry. So all of us coaches out there, we go out and get these certifications from wherever they are. There's a million certifications out there you can get from coaching, but it's all very different. What I found was I couldn't teach people to be me. And no matter how hard I tried, I struggled to get people to coach exactly the way that I was coaching. And because I couldn't streamline that, and because I put so much passion into my clients, and I couldn't get my coaches to deliver it the same way I did, I decided that it was not worth the time for me to build up a coaching enterprise full of different coaches who I thought were going to deliver it very differently than I did. I'm not necessarily saying you can't do it. It just wasn't a great fit for me.
Sure. And when you talk about referrals, if you're looking at tips for small business people to get more referrals, what are a couple of key tips on how to get better referrals?
Couple quick things. Number one, you've got to know, as we said before, Paul, what your target client is, because it's really hard for you to ask for a referral if you're not crystal clear about your target client. And that needs to be as narrow as possible. So if you're an accountant, you can't say everyone who needs an accountant is my target client. That's not going to work. So number one, be very narrow, be crystal clear about what your target client is. Number two is get used to asking for referrals. And where do you start to ask? I always start with my current clients. If someone comes to me and says, CJ, I need to grow my business, I will always say, go to your current clients and ask for more business. And if you go to your current clients and they enjoy working with you and you give them a very specific referral you're looking for, they will help you grow your business.
Great. Fantastic. And as far as your team, who supports you in running your business?
I have a marketing person who supports me right now and a financial person who supports me. I had a executive assistant for many, many years, and right now I am without an executive assistant. I will probably add a new one fairly soon. But I have a very small, very streamlined team.
Great. And the marketing and finance people, are they dedicated to your business or do they work for others as well?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say they're both 90% dedicated to my business, but they do dabble with some other things as well.
Great. And I know that you've said that, most of your business comes from referrals. And I know there was a study, I think there was 7,500 people researched and 85% of people said, referrals was the key source of new business. What's your marketing person do other than, if the referrals are being done by you, what are the key things that your marketing person's doing at the moment to help you drive your business?
That's a good question. So I'm in the process of, I don't want to say rebranding, that's too broad. I have a foundation and my marketing person is focused heavily on helping get my foundation's message out into the marketplace and helping me to land speaking engagements across the United States and hopefully across the world. And so they're focused on those two items. From a finding new clients business, my marketing person doesn't worry about that at all.
Okay, great. So it's really positioning you as an expert and building that foundation is where
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. And I know that a lot of small business people at the moment have sort of scratched their heads on, well, what can a marketing person do for me? What are some of the key things in your clients' businesses that you're seeing that are working other than referrals at the moment when it comes to marketing?
So big question. I would say this. There are fundamentally, in my mind, three general types of marketing resources out there in the marketplace. There is number one, the big agency. Number two, there is bringing on a full-time person. And number three, there is going out and outsourcing that marketing, using Upwork or some other vehicles like that where you can utilize this gig economy right now. As a small business owner, what I would recommend that you do is the following. If you are prepared to do the project management of the marketing on your own, to manage everything that gets done and when it gets done, I recommend that you explore the concept of this gig economy, that you outsource your marketing. Now, if you're the type of person who wants everything to be done by someone else, you are either going to hire the big agency or bring on a full-time person. My recommendation for small business owners is to outsource in the beginning. And here's why. You need to learn how to project manage your marketing. And when we say marketing, what we fundamentally mean is you need someone to build a website for you. You need someone to maintain a website for you. You need someone to make certain that your social channels, your Facebook, your Instagram, your Twitter, so on and so forth, are clean. And you need someone to explore this concept and idea of creating content for you, whether it's a podcast or a blog or video, whatever it ends up being. Those are the types of fundamental services you need, the basic stuff. Then once you get past the basic stuff, Paul, then you can start talking to a professional about providing you with the advice about advertising, pay-per-click and that sort of thing. Those are the basic items that someone can help you with as a small business owner. My advice is start small. Believe me, I've done it both ways. Start small as a small business owner. Outsource in the beginning.
And what are some of the biggest challenges that you face in growing your business?
Now I feel like this is therapy for me, Paul. I got big challenges. So I have a very healthy business in Central Indiana in the United States of America. I'm in this spot where I really want to grow and build a national presence. But I feel called right now. I'm giving that quotes, Paul. I feel called to grow a foundation that I'm really passionate about. And so I'm in this weird spot where I want to grow my business and become this nationally recognized speaker who focuses on helping professionals more effectively run their businesses and their lives. At the same time, my foundation is what really tugs at my heart. And so I try to determine where I spend my time between those two. And some days I'm really good at dividing and conquering, and other days I'm not so good.
Yeah, and look, I suppose our whole premise around build, live, give is build a great business, live a good life, and give back. So there's that's often a challenge. What's worked best for you in solving that challenge today?
Solving would be a strong term, but I would say this. I'm making a lot of progress because I'm deciding to go out and to take some risks and some responsibilities. So I've talked for years about this concept of having a foundation. Well, now I've gone out and spent a lot of money on it. And now I am basically signing myself up to speak for free in front of nonprofit organizations. And because I'm putting myself out there and I'm no longer just talking about it, I find that it is becoming a bigger part of what it is that I do. And what's interesting about that too is that because I think all business owners are motivated by what they're passionate about, the more passionate I get about what it is I do from my foundation standpoint, the better it is I am at being a coach and running my own business as well.
Great. Well, before we go into the next section, I'd like to mention our community, which helps corporate escapees, just like CJ, to build, live, and give. You get direct coaching by myself and access to hundreds of vetted suppliers. So you can just go to blgboost.com to find out more. So the next section is the live section. So just tell us about a couple of the key daily habits that help you be successful.
I wake up every day very early and I have a silent time in the morning where I pray and meditate. It allows me to start my day off in a very healthy, centered way. I changed the way I ate probably about 5 years ago, and I eat I'm not a total health nut. Like, for example, I had French fries for dinner tonight, so I don't want anyone to think I'm a total crazy health nut, but I eat significantly more vegetables, and it has given me more, I'll say, energy throughout the day. And then finally, I work out every day, not necessarily to stay thin, but because mentally my body needs the exercise. And so I would say to anyone out there, you've got to find a way to get that exercise, a little bit of daily prayer and meditation, whatever that means for you, and then eat as healthy as you can. Avoid those fried foods as best you can. Those are 3 very simple things that most people are going to tell you can't be done. But if you make those a priority, it really helps your quality of life and the quality of your business.
And we talked about Nicole, your wife, before, but when she listens to this podcast, what would you like to say to her about the support she's given you through this journey?
I would say to her what I've said a long time, which is, it might sound cliche, but I truly am only as good as the woman who stands behind me, and her support. And I think the key word with my wife is patience with me over the years has been a key factor in my success for a variety of reasons. The biggest possibly being is we have 2 kids, and she manages our household, and she makes sure the kids do everything they're supposed to do. And our kids are amazing and wonderful. A lot of that reason is that she's a really great mom, and she allows me to focus on the business because everything at home runs so smoothly.
Great. And the next section is the give section. And I know you've mentioned a couple of times the foundation, but just tell us a little bit more about the foundation and why you're so passionate about it.
I'm going to do this very quickly. So what I found out about 10 years ago is no matter how much money I helped executives make, they never seemed to be satisfied. And I began to read as much as I could and try to figure out what's the key to happiness? How do I figure out a way to help my professionals enjoy their lives more? And so it's, do I want a bigger house? Do I want a better this or better that, whatever it ends up being? And what I figured out is that if people live by two rules, their quality of life goes up significantly. And those two rules are to live gratefully and to give generously. And in the United States, at least, Paul, we give about 2.2% of our average annual take-home pay to charitable organizations. A very small amount for a variety of different reasons. What I found is when I can inspire professionals to give their time and money away, their quality of life goes through the roof. And I feel called to help professionals identify the charitable organizations they love and they want to be compassionate about, and not to just give $1 here or $100 there, but to get really meaningful and get really involved in these organizations. And the more you get involved, and whether it's financially or with your time, whatever it is, the quality of life, the feedback I'm getting from these people from their quality of life improvement is through the roof. And so what I do is our foundation, we don't raise any money for ourselves. All we do is go out to our marketplace and inspire professionals to give their time and money away to other charitable organizations.
Absolutely brilliant. The last section's the action sections, where I just ask you some questions and you just give me some rapid fire responses. So the first is, what are your top 3 productivity tips?
Shut the door when you're working so that no one interrupts you. Plan the day in advance and block your schedule for the types of things you need to be doing on a day-to-day basis that are a little bit more routine, so that you don't let the day run you, you run it.
Great. And what are some of your favorite apps, whether it be on your phone or on your desktop, that you couldn't live without?
Couldn't live without. So I do love Mr. Spotify, and I love listening to a bunch of different music. And then I've bought in, like a lot of people have, to headspace.com, or Headspace, not .com. Maybe it is .com. At any rate, the Headspace app for meditation. I really enjoy that app. And then I think you would call it an app now, but I've become completely addicted to Netflix. Completely addicted.
Yeah.
Which that's not going to help you with productivity, though. I can guarantee that, Paul.
No, but it helps you to switch off. But just give me one series. What's a current series that you're watching that you'd recommend?
You ready? Paul, I just finished a series called Glitch that I loved. Do you know what country Glitch is from? I'm pretty certain.
No idea.
I'm almost positive it's from Australia, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm almost positive.
Be good.
Yeah, it's very good. I absolutely loved it.
Brilliant. Excellent. And other than your podcast, what's another podcast that you recommend and why?
So I love Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History. I don't know if you're a fan of his, but he does this great podcast where he looks at these very unique things that have happened throughout history and explains them in a different way. And now, as a podcast guy, his production and the way he delivers his podcast is absolutely brilliant how well he does. I aim to one day have a podcast as exquisitely done as his.
Excellent. And what's some parting advice you'd love to leave our listeners?
You know what, Paul, I would challenge your listeners to focus on being the very best person they can be in 24-hour chunks. You know, we all get so focused on what am I going to do tomorrow and the next week and the next month and the next year. I would challenge your listeners to just ask themselves, what can I do today to be a little bit better than I was yesterday? And if you do that day in and day out, you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish.
Excellent. Well, we'll have all the links to all the brilliant information that CJ's given on today's podcast. So that'll be in the show notes, but you can also go to coachcj.com and you can find out more about exactly how to work with CJ, his fantastic podcast, and also about his foundation, because I love the foundation. You know, that's certainly a big part of Build, Live, Give, and I love the way that you're doing that, CJ. So we really love having you on the podcast. I know it's been a while since you've escaped corporate, but you've certainly articulated that well, but also given lots of other practical advice, because I know you work with so many small businesses in the US, and it's great to hear your brilliant advice. So CJ, thanks for being on the Corporate Escapees podcast.
Hey, thanks, Paul. I really feel blessed. Have a great day, my friend.
Great. Thanks, CJ.
Thank you for listening to the Corporate Escapees podcast, brought to you by the team at Build, Live, Give. If you found this podcast helpful, please share it with other corporate escapees. If you would like to join a community of like-minded peers, please visit www.buildlivegive.com. Until next time, thanks for listening and be brave.